By now you probably know how this sermon is going to start, since we're on a series about the Grinch. It's not just the Grinch that steals Christmas. And so we start with mentioning how, we light the candle of joy, and it's lit for maybe 40 minutes or 140 minutes, depending on how long the sermon for today is. And then we go home, so we've experienced this joy, we've sung joy to the world, then we go home and it's back to the real world. And maybe it doesn't feel like joy to the world or joy in our world. Maybe the real world feels more like one that is marked by sadness, sometimes even depression. And certainly for all of us at some point in our lives are marked with grief. There are seasons of grief that we go through. The loss that we experience, it can be the loss of a loved one. It can be the loss of relationship. It can be the loss of hopes or dreams. We all experience seasons of grief in our lives, and at some point those seasons of grief are going to line up with the season of, the most wonderful time of the year. Isn't it the most wonderful time of the year unless you're grieving? Or you don't like snow, in which case it's not that great either. But we go through these seasons of grief, and so much for the candle of joy. Yeah, we light it here, but we snuff it out. We may as well just snuff out our joy on the way home, right? So what are we to do with that? You see, it's not just the Grinch that can steal our Christmas. As we've already looked at, last week we looked at how our expectations of the future can steal our hope. And the week before that we looked at how wars and rumors of wars and conflicts closer to home, they can steal our peace. Well, this week we're thinking about how grief can steal our joy. And what can we do about that? Or is there anything we can do about that? Well, I think one thing we can do is turn to our scripture focus that Susan read for us today. I think that's going to teach us something. There is something helpful there. And so let's take a look at it again. And I'm just going to read some parts of it there. And I want you to listen out and see if you notice anything. I'll maybe try to highlight it as I read and see what you notice here. So here's Isaiah's hope. Here's what he's saying will happen. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it will blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. So there's joy and singing. That's great. There's joy there, right? The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it. And we can go on. They shall see the glory of the Lord. A little further on it says, then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped. That will happen. The lame shall leap like a deer, and on it goes. And if you're to go back and through our scripture focus and read the whole thing again, what are you going to notice there? Did anybody notice what there is to be noticed there? It's this, it shall happen, it will happen. In other words, all this talking that Isaiah is speaking about joy, it's all stuff in the future. It shall happen. They shall rejoice, they shall leap with joy. It will come, but it's in the future, it's not now. And I think that's very instructive for us. Actually, there is a little bit here in Isaiah 35 that does actually speak to present. Most of it is in the future tense, but here's just 2 verses in the present, and notice what it says. In verses 3 and 4, if you have it open at Isaiah 35, verses 3 and 4, strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong, do not fear, here is your God. That's the only part in this entire passage of Isaiah 35 that's in the present tense. And what is it? Strengthen. Nurture strength. And say to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. The idea here is trust in God. That's what's in the present tense. Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say be joyful. It doesn't say rejoice. all of Isaiah's hope here in Isaiah 35, it points to rejoicing to come. Joy will come. But right now, all you can do, and the people in this day that Isaiah is speaking about in the past there, the people in that day, all they could do at that point was to be as strong as they could. To nurture what strength that they could to face each day, because the days were tough. To nurture that strength and to trust. To not fear, but to trust God. It wasn't their place, as they're going through tough times, to manufacture joy or to make themselves look happy. They weren't singing the song, "Don't worry, be happy." They weren't singing that. We're not going to sing that this morning either, sorry. That was not the right thing to do. The right thing to do was to nurture what strength they could and trust, not fearing. But watch for that joy that will come. It's in the future. It will come. But this isn't the season to experience it right now. So there's something I think we want to learn from that, is to, well, we go through seasons, right? To not manufacture joy or make ourselves look happy if actually we're not. I have to confess, actually, as some of you know, I'm nurturing a wee bit of an injury, which makes it really painful for me to sit down for any more than 2 minutes. And so Bill and Esther, God bless you. Thank you for bringing that wonderful spiel about joy. But as you were speaking about joy, I was sitting in pain, and I was anything but joyful. And sometimes we just can't manufacture the joy, right? Because sometimes we're sitting in pain, and maybe it's not physical pain, but maybe it's emotional pain. It's grief. It can be grief. And the pain that that brings to our hearts. And our place isn't to just make ourselves look happy or be joyful, but to say, yeah, you know what? I am in pain. I am in grief. There's a passage that speaks to seasons in Ecclesiastes. Maybe some of you know it. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. But maybe you noticed in there, a time to mourn and a time for dancing. Now, we usually think of Christmas as being that time for dancing, right? But sometimes, and I think for all of us at some point, we will hit that Christmas season where we're experiencing grief, and that's not the time to dance. That the season that we're experiencing in life doesn't match the church calendar. Well, you can't always fit yourself into the church calendar. If it's a time for dancing in the church calendar, it may not be a time for you to dance, and that's okay. It may be a time for you to mourn. So let's not manufacture joy, but let's be authentic in the emotions that we're going through, the stuff of life we're going through, and sometimes that is grief. It's okay. It's normal. In fact, it's unhealthy to try to put that grief off and set it aside as if it doesn't exist, when it does exist. You don't just get over grief, as I've heard it said, you get through it. And that's where you nurture strength to get through it. You look to others to nurture strength to get through it. It's ironic, isn't it, that church is the last place people want to be found crying. Isn't that so ironic? Really, we should be the people amongst whom you can come and bawl your eyes out because of something happened in your life that just sucks. We should be the place. The people amongst whom you can shed a tear. I hope that we can find ourselves being comfortable with one another in that way. And this is one of those moments where I'm completely lost in my sermon notes. I'm not even on the right page. But anyway, there we go. Your grief does not care that it's Christmas. Your grief does not get the memo. So be okay with grieving, even though it might be Christmas time and you think you should be joyful. And let's be sensitive to the people around us, some of whom are grieving, and not expect wonderful expressions of joy from them, but give them space to grieve and see how we can help them in their grief. And it's not helpful to force them to try and be joyful, is it? See, one of the things we might want to do if we find ourselves in a space of grief, in a season of grief, and it's not lining up with the season of joy that it's supposed to be, one of the things we might want to do is find ourselves in the Christmas story. And we might not find ourselves, or maybe we do this year, but maybe we don't, find ourselves like with the wise men, that they're overjoyed when they saw the star. They were filled with incredible joy. They saw the star. And maybe that's you this Christmas, but maybe it's not. Maybe that's not your place in the story this year. Or maybe you're with the shepherds. The excitement of being with this infant Jesus and going to see what has happened. Let's go and see this thing that has happened that the angels have told us about. Maybe that's you this year. You're excited about it. Bring Christmas on. Let's go. I'm not quite that excited because I'm not done my Christmas shopping yet, and I really only have to buy for one person. But maybe that is you, that you're excited, but maybe it's not. And you're just not feeling that this year. Maybe you feel more like the Christmas story in Matthew. It's not all fun and games. When Herod wants to take out baby Jesus, and to do so he takes out all the infants of Bethlehem. And maybe that's your place in the story this year, or some year. That place of weeping and mourning over this terrible thing that has happened. And maybe there's a terrible thing that has happened in your life that you need to express grief over and weeping over. Maybe that's your place in the Christmas story. Maybe not this year, but some year that might be your place in this Christmas story. It's okay to feel that grief, to go through it. It's important. You have to wonder, those people that experienced that grief with Herod, what was their experience of Christmas? Yeah. Like, did anything really change that first Christmas? Of course, we want to say, well, yes, everything changed because the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Well, yes, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, but did anybody care? Nobody really cared. There was a handful of wise men, they cared. There was a handful of shepherds, they cared. But the rest of the world didn't care. What really changed that first Christmas? Nobody set up a tree, nobody did decorating, nobody had a turkey dinner. Nobody exchanged gifts that first Christmas. That first Christmas came and went with the majority of the world not even noticing. Did anything really change? And did anything really change when people were still facing lives that were hard? Still facing oppression? Did anything change? Here's proof that nothing changed. An innocent man was crucified. There's proof that nothing changed. In fact, even before that, there was proof that nothing changed on Christmas Day when Herod decided he didn't want a pretender to the throne, so he had all these infants killed. That's the kind of world they were living in. It's the kind of world we live in. Did anything really change that Christmas? But then you get to the cross, and Jesus is crucified because people in power will use their power to keep other people from gaining power. That's the way the world works. This is after Christmas, after that first Christmas. Did anything really change when that happened and Jesus was crucified? See, the cross is proof that things didn't change. There's still, well, we could speak about Herod's reign of terror in the days of those infants being massacred. We can speak about Pilate's reign of terror when he gave the orders, yeah, crucify him. And we can still speak of reign of terror today. They just go by different names. It might not be Herod, it might not be Pilate. Maybe it's Hitler, maybe it's Putin, maybe it's cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig's, all kinds of different names that a reign of terror goes under today, to show that that's still the world we live in, a world full of pain, where bad things happen. Did anything really change that first Christmas? Something changed the Sunday after that Good Friday. Jesus rose from the dead. It's a new day. Joy will come. Joy will come. And that's part of what we experience here at Advent. We're not in Christmas yet. We Baptists were terrible at doing this Christmas and Advent thing. We just rush straight into Christmas. Actually, the whole world rushes straight into Christmas, right? Why? Because it's easier to sell stuff at Christmas than it is at Advent. And so we as Baptists, we've typically just followed along with the world and start singing Christmas carols, start getting Christmassy, start decorating and everything for Christmas. And we kind of miss Advent. And Advent is that time of saying, you know what, this is like Old Testament times where things are not the way they ought to be. Where people like Herod have a reign of terror. That's Advent. And Advent is that time of anticipating that God will do something about that. That's Advent. And we still today live in those days of looking forward to God doing something about those terrible reigns of terror, including death itself, the reign of terror of death itself that it brings into our lives. I think it was Greg that first tipped me off that Joy to the World isn't really a Christmas carol. It's actually, well, we consider it more of an Advent carol. And it was written actually not about Jesus' birth, but about Jesus' second coming. Joy to the world. The Lord has come. And it speaks about no more may thorns infest the ground. Looking back to Genesis chapter 3 with the fall. And if you look through the words of Joy to the World, it's just this beautiful thing about Christ coming again. It's about the future to us, what's coming, about the joy that is coming. Joy to the world, guess what? It's in the future yet. We're still living in the days where things are not the way they ought to be. And when things are not the way they ought to be, sometimes we're not going to feel the joy at Christmas. We're going to lament. We're going to feel the grief. And that's okay. So I think here's the point is, what happens when joy wants to, or when grief wants to steal our joy at Christmas? You might need to lend your joy to grief for a time, for a season. But say, I want it back. Don't let grief steal your joy. Just lend it for a season. You're getting that joy back someday. And maybe, I kind of think so the joy candle, we kind of do it backwards with the Advent candles here. To me, it's one we should light at the end, first beginning of the service, and then snuff it out at some point to make the point that maybe we're not there yet. Christ is yet to come back. God is yet to intervene and put things right. In the meantime, we live these lives that can be difficult and hard and full of pain. And so maybe we should be snuffing out that candle and saying, you know what, today I don't feel it. But maybe tomorrow I'll light it and I'll feel more joy. Maybe Christmas Day I'll light the joy candle. Maybe I'll feel it then. Or maybe it'll be next year's Christmas Day that I light it. But there's always hope for the future. It will be lit. Joy will be there. It's coming. Don't let grief steal your joy. But recognize you might need to lend it. You might need to lend your joy out for a time, for a season, if you're going through a season of grief.